The sky burned with fire. 1,000 ships clashed in the void above, and their wreckage rained down upon the shattered earth. Amid the chaos, one warrior fought with the ferocity of her kind. She had been raised to believe pain was weakness, that only strength defined worth. Her people were bred for war, engineered to triumph or die. She struck down enemies with precision, her blade crackling with energy, her armor dented but unbroken. Every movement was an affirmation of her place in the world, an elite, a soldier, a weapon. Yet even weapons can break. The blast came, without warning. A shockwave of fire and shrapnel tore through the battlefield, lifting her from the ground. Metal ripped into her side, crushing bone, tearing muscle. She landed hard, her weapon skittering out of reach, her body convulsing in pain. For the first time in her life, her limbs refused her command. She tried to rise. Her legs trembled, one refusing to bear weight, the other twisted at an unnatural angle. Her vision blurred, crimson seeping into her sight from a gash across her brow. She spat blood, gritted her teeth, and crawled. A soldier of her people did not cry out. A soldier endured until the end. Shapes emerged through the smoke, her squad. Relief surged in her chest, fragile and fleeting. They approached, their shadows sharp against the burning wreckage. She reached out, voice raw. "I still fight. I still live. Help me stand." Their gazes were cold, unflinching. One warrior, taller than the rest, looked down at her broken form. His voice carried no malice, only indifference. "You are finished. The unfit are left behind." She stared, disbelieving. "I am not finished. I can still." Strength is survival. Weakness is death. You know the law. The others turned away. Their boots thudded against the scorched earth as they marched on, leaving her sprawled in ash. She screamed after them, fury burning hotter than the wound tearing through her side. "I am not weak." But they did not look back. She dragged herself forward, inch by inch, nails clawing into soil that crumbled beneath her weight. Pain radiated through her body with every movement, yet still she crawled. Pride demanded it. Survival demanded it. She would not die abandoned in the dirt like carrion. Time blurred. Smoke hung heavy, choking the air, turning her breath shallow and ragged. Around her lay the remains of soldiers, both hers and her enemies, twisted metal and flesh, indistinguishable in death. For the first time, she saw the truth her people never spoke. The strong rot just the same as the weak. She tried to pull herself toward a ruined barricade for cover. Her arms shook violently, refusing to obey her will. Her body collapsed, the effort too great. She lay there, cheek pressed into the grit, listening to the fading echoes of battle. A bitter thought clawed its way into her mind. This was how she would end. Not in glory, not in triumph. Broken, discarded, forgotten. Rage flickered weakly, but despair smothered it. She had been raised to believe death was a doorway to honor, yet nothing about this felt honorable. Her comrades had abandoned her without hesitation. Was her worth so fragile? Was loyalty so hollow? Her eyes closed, heavy as stone. She welcomed the darkness. It promised relief from agony, release from shame. But the world did not end. Through the haze of unconsciousness, faint vibrations stirred her awareness. A rhythmic crunch against the ground. Footsteps. Not her people. They would not return. Perhaps scavengers. Perhaps the enemy come to finish the wounded. She did not care. The sound drew closer, steady, unhurried. Her mind clung to fragments of thought. If this was the end, let it come quickly. Let the blade fall and silence claim her. Instead, a shadow loomed above her, blocking the firelight. A figure bent low, and for an instant she caught a glimpse through half-shut eyes. Not the familiar armored visage of her kind, but something smaller, stranger. The figure did not speak. Hands, steady but careful, lifted her shoulder, checking her wounds. She flinched at the touch, too weak to resist. Warmth seeped through where the grip steadied her, foreign and unexpected. Her lips parted in a whisper, no louder than breath. End it. But the shadow did not obey. Instead of the final strike she expected, the hands pressed against her wound, slowing the bleed. She hissed in pain, confusion stirring against the weight of exhaustion.
Why?
Her people had left her. The law of strength had condemned her. Yet here was someone who owed her nothing, kneeling in the ash, staving off death she had already accepted. Her thoughts scattered. She tried to speak again, but the words failed. Darkness surged once more, pulling her under. The last thing she knew was the faint rhythm of foreign hands working to keep her alive, when by every law she knew, she should have been left to die. And then there was silence. The taste of iron lingered on her tongue when she awoke. Pain pulsed through her side, sharp and insistent, tethering her to life she had not chosen to keep. Her first instinct was to reach for a weapon, but her body betrayed her again. Her arm trembled, collapsing before it reached the ground. She blinked, vision adjusting to dim light. The air smelled of burned metal and antiseptic, strange, clean, not of her people. A figure sat nearby, cross-legged, back straight, watching her without fear. The same shadow she had glimpsed before. Human. His armor was simple, scratched from use, patched in places with makeshift repairs. His hands were stained with blood, hers and perhaps his own. Beside him, a small kit lay open, tools spread in precise order. She tried to rise. Agony tore through her ribs, forcing her back down with a groan. The human raised a hand in calm silence, a gesture meant to steady her, not to dominate. She bared her teeth, a reflex of defiance. Why keep me breathing? The human did not answer immediately. He reached for the kit, lifted a vial, and changed the dressing over her wound with practiced movements. His touch was efficient, careful, never cruel. At last, his voice came, low, steady, not the harsh bark of a warrior. Because you're alive. She narrowed her eyes. His words were meaningless to her ears. In her world, life was not enough. Victory defined worth. Survival through weakness was worse than death. You waste effort, she rasped, voice cracking. I am broken. My kind discard what cannot fight. He met her gaze without flinching. Then your kind are wrong. Anger surged, momentarily stronger than the pain. She tried to shove him away, but her arm collapsed uselessly. He did not restrain her, did not mock her failure. He simply steadied her as she sagged back, exhaustion overtaking rage. Shame burned in her chest. She despised the helplessness, despised the quiet calm with which he treated her weakness. Was this pity? She had no use for it. Pity was poison. Yet when the darkness threatened again, she felt the faintest trace of security in knowing he remained beside her, not as a jailer, but as a sentinel keeping death at bay. Hours passed in uneasy silence. The human tended his small fire, rationed food from sealed packs, and shared water with her in measured sips. She resisted at first, but thirst drove her to accept. The taste was unfamiliar, almost sweet. Her people would have left her to starve, a test of strength. He pressed the flask into her hands without hesitation, then turned his attention back to repairing a torn strap of his armor. His movements were deliberate, methodical, as though every action carried weight. She studied him. His frame was lean, his armor crude compared to hers, his tools primitive. By every measure her people valued, he should have been inferior. Yet he had chosen to preserve her life when even her own blood had refused. The question gnawed at her. What do you gain from this? He did not look up from his work. Nothing. Then why? At that, he paused, glancing at her with eyes neither cruel nor soft, but steady. Because no one deserves to be left alone to die. The words struck something deep within her, though she resisted their weight. Deserve. Among her kind, no such concept existed. There was only strength or failure, victory or oblivion. To speak of worth beyond utility was weakness. And yet, he spoke it as if it were the simplest truth in the universe. When sleep finally overtook her again, it was not the cold, despairing sleep of a dying warrior. It was restless, but held together by the strange certainty that someone would still be there when she woke. The following days blurred into fragments of recovery. The human tended her wounds with unshaken discipline. He improvised splints from shattered debris, mixed poultices from salvaged supplies, and stitched torn flesh with hands that trembled only when still. She tried more than once to demand he stop, to tell him she was not his burden, but he ignored such protests. Not with arrogance, but with quiet resolve. He listened when she cursed him, but never answered in kind. In her culture, silence was contempt. Here it felt like patience. One night, when the distant echoes of battle rolled across the sky, she stirred from uneasy sleep to find him sitting near the fire, head bowed, staring at something unseen. For the first time, she saw weariness in his posture, the weight of unseen battles carried alone. She rasped through cracked lips, "Why fight to save an enemy?" His eyes lifted to hers, shadowed by firelight. "Because one day, it might be me lying broken. Wouldn't you want someone to choose differently?" The simplicity disarmed her more than any weapon could have. She had no answer. Her people had abandoned her, without hesitation. She had never once imagined a hand reaching back. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but fragile. She turned her gaze away, unwilling to let him see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. In the days that followed, her body began to respond. She could sit up with effort, though every movement was agony. She hated the weakness, yet she found herself accepting his help, if only because he offered it without judgment. Every act of kindness deepened her confusion. Was it strategy? Some ploy to soften her until he could use her? Or was this truly what humans were, that even in the ashes of war, they chose to save life instead of discard it? At night, when sleep would not come, she turned the question over again and again, finding no answer. The only truth was the human at her side, unyielding in his quiet purpose, unwilling to let her slip into the death she had already embraced. And against her will, she began to wonder if perhaps there was strength in this mercy, a strength her people had never taught her to see. Her body healed slowly, stubbornly clinging to life despite the weight of her injuries. Every day brought pain, yet every day she found herself rising a little higher, sitting a little longer, her strength returning in pieces. She hated the dependence, the humiliation of being lifted to drink, of leaning on another's arm to shift position. But beneath that hatred grew something more dangerous: gratitude. The human never treated her as a burden. He never mocked her weakness, never demanded repayment. He worked in silence, patience his only weapon. His eyes carried a steadiness she had never seen before, as if nothing she said or did could shake his resolve. That unsettled her more than abandonment ever had. Once, when frustration boiled over, she snarled at him, demanding he stop wasting time on her. "I am not yours to save. Leave me to my fate." He looked at her for a long moment, then answered simply, "You're not mine, but you're still someone." The words pierced her armor deeper than any blade. She turned away, unwilling to let him see how they struck her. Someone. To her people, she was already nothing, a broken tool discarded in the dirt. But in his eyes, even shattered, she remained something more. As days passed, fragments of his story slipped through in quiet moments. He told of battles fought not for conquest, but to preserve lives. Of comrades he could not save, faces that haunted his silence. He spoke with no embellishment, no claim to glory, only truth. Each word carried a weight that reminded her of her own losses. When he spoke of a child he had once tried to heal, only to arrive too late, she saw the flicker of grief cross his face. A grief her kind would have buried beneath cold indifference. To show such pain was weakness in her world. Yet in him, it looked like strength, the strength to remember, to keep fighting so others might not share the same fate. Against her instincts, she began to share pieces of her own story. How she had been raised in the training halls where failure was met with punishment. How honor was measured in kills, and weakness was cleansed through abandonment. She told him of the battle, of the blast that shattered her body, of the moment her comrades turned away without hesitation. She expected him to sneer, to condemn her people as monsters. Instead, he only listened. When she finished, he said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "That must have hurt more than the wound." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Pain of the spirit was not acknowledged among her kind. To admit it existed was to admit frailty. Yet he had seen it in her words, in her silence, and named it without judgment. That night, she lay awake, staring at the dim light of the fire. Her body ached, but the ache inside her chest was worse, sharper, because it was unfamiliar. Doubt gnawed at the foundations of everything she had believed. If her people's strength meant abandoning the fallen, what was it worth? If this human's weakness meant saving even the broken, was it truly weakness? Her recovery continued. She learned to stand, leaning heavily on him at first, then with only the support of a makeshift crutch. Every step was agony, but each one lit a spark of defiance. She would not remain the discarded. She would rise. And with each step, she could not ignore that he was there beside her, steadying her, never letting her fall. Once, when she stumbled and cursed herself, he caught her, holding her upright. She spat in frustration. "Why do you not see me as useless? I can barely walk." His reply came without hesitation. "Because you're still trying." The simplicity of it disarmed her again. Her people judged by results, by victory alone. But he judged by effort, by will, by the refusal to surrender. In the days that followed, something shifted between them. Their silences became less strained. She found herself watching him as he worked, noting the precision in his hands, the way he hummed under his breath when he thought she slept. He was not imposing, not a towering figure of dominance, yet his presence filled the space with a quiet strength she had come to rely on. One evening, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, she spoke the thought that had been festering. "Among my kind, mercy is weakness. To keep me alive is folly. And yet you persist. Why?" He met her gaze, eyes steady. "Because you're worth saving, even if you don't believe it yet." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She turned away, but the heat rising in her chest betrayed her. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the certainty of her old beliefs. Yet every action, every moment he had stayed at her side, told her otherwise. She had been broken and discarded, her worth stripped away by those she had trusted most. Yet this human, a stranger, had given her more than her people ever had. The belief that life itself carried meaning, that even the wounded, the flawed, the fallen, still had value. Her heart warred with itself. Pride demanded she resist, that she remain unmoved. But the truth seeped through the cracks of her certainty. Each act of kindness, each patient silence, each steady hand pressed against her wounds, it was all proof of something her people had never understood. For the first time, she began to wonder if true strength was not the absence of weakness, but the choice to stand beside it, to lift it, to endure with it. The thought terrified her. Yet it also gave her something she had not felt since the day she fell on the battlefield. Hope. The quiet days of recovery ended when the distant thunder of engines cut through the air. Patrols. Her ears caught the rhythm instantly, the sound of boots on soil, voices sharp and familiar. Her people. They had returned, not for her, but to scour the battlefield for what remained. She froze, every muscle tense, shame and rage colliding in her chest. If they found her here, alive and crippled, it would not be rescue. It would be execution. A broken soldier was a liability, a stain upon their pride. And beside her stood the human who had saved her, who would be marked for death simply for keeping her alive. The medic's eyes flicked to hers. No fear, only calm determination. He adjusted the crude weapon slung at his side and whispered, "Stay quiet. I'll handle it." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Handle them? One man against trained warriors? He was smaller, his equipment crude, his body unaugmented. Yet the steadiness in his voice held no doubt. He was prepared to stand between her and the blades of her own people. The first of the patrol stepped into view, armored and sharp, their movements efficient, impersonal. They swept the ruins with methodical precision, and when their eyes fell upon her, recognition flared. One raised a weapon, then hesitated, sneering. "You still live." The voice carried disdain. "Pathetic. You should have bled out with the rest." Her mouth opened, but no words came. The shame was too heavy. Another soldier stepped forward, gaze shifting to the human. "And this? A scavenger keeping carrion alive? Disgusting." His tone was dismissive, certain that one strike would end both their lives. Before the order could fall, the human moved. He positioned himself between her and the soldiers, weapon raised, stance unyielding. "If you want her dead," he said evenly, "you'll have to go through me." The patrol laughed, the sound hollow, cruel. To them, he was nothing more than prey inviting slaughter. Yet he did not falter. His shoulders squared, his hands steady. There was no arrogance in his defiance, only resolve. Her people had never shielded her this way, never placed themselves between danger and the broken. To them, protection was wasted on the weak. Yet here stood this human, fully aware of the odds, refusing to abandon her. The patrol advanced, weapons raised, voices sharp. Instinct surged within her, demanding she rise, fight, prove she was not finished. Her body betrayed her again, trembling with weakness, but still she forced herself to her feet, leaning on the crutch he had carved for her. One soldier scoffed at the sight. "Look at her, barely standing. End this farce." But her voice, though strained, cut through the air. "No, not like this." She limped forward, planting herself beside the human. Her hands shook as she lifted a broken shard of metal, the closest thing she had to a weapon. She could barely hold it steady, yet still she raised it. "I was left to die, but I am not finished. Not while he stands for me." The words struck harder than the shard in her grip. The soldiers hesitated, confusion flickering behind their cold discipline. Among her kind, the discarded never rose again. To see her alive, defiant, and claiming worth from a human's arms, it was an affront to everything they believed. The leader snarled, ordering them forward. But the moment had shifted. She felt it in their hesitation, in the doubts seeping through their ranks. They had expected weakness, silence, surrender. Instead, they found a broken warrior who refused to kneel, standing beside an enemy who refused to abandon. The clash came swift and brutal. The human fired with precision, forcing them back step by step. She fought at his side, every strike fueled not by strength, but by sheer will. Pain tore through her with each movement, yet she refused to fall. Together, they carved a space against impossible odds, not through overwhelming power, but through defiance that would not break. At last, the patrol withdrew, their discipline fractured. They did not retreat out of mercy, but because they no longer understood what they faced. A cripple who still stood, and a human who shielded her as though her life mattered.
To them, it was senseless.
To her, it was salvation. When silence returned, she collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. The human caught her before she hit the ground, steadying her with arms that had never once let her fall. His breathing was ragged, his face streaked with grime, but his eyes remained steady. "You stood," he said softly. She looked at him, and for the first time, she felt no shame. "Because you did first." The words lingered, carrying more weight than any vow of loyalty she had spoken in her life. She had been cast aside, branded useless, yet here she had found something greater than the glory of conquest or the law of strength. She had found worth in the eyes of someone who should have been her enemy, yet chose instead to save her. Her people had abandoned her, but in his arms she had discovered a truth they could never see. Strength was not the absence of weakness. Strength was choosing to protect, even when it cost everything. Strength was the courage to see value where others saw none. Broken and left for dead, she had expected only silence. Instead, she had been given something her world had never offered her: mercy, defiance, and the chance to rise again. And for the first time in her life, She believed that was enough.